Now, last week, Michael Robinson died. Michael was 61. He had a meteoric career in England. He played for Liverpool when they won the European Cup. He played for Ireland. He was a dashing centre forward, someone that I never met, but he died at a very young age, and we didn't have the time to fully appreciate him on the stand, and we want to do so now. And we're joined from Spain, Barcelona, where he works, by an Irish journalist, Richard Fitzpatrick, who's a regular contributor and a very valued contributor to the stand. And we want to also talk to Richard about the possibility of the Spanish league, La Liga, beginning again. It's a matter of some controversy in Spain, where there have been over 20,000 deaths from the coronavirus, and it's very serious and continuing problem for the country outside of the football community. Richard, first of all, the story of Michael Robinson is quite extraordinary. He was a very good footballer, played for Liverpool, played for Ireland, and went to play in Spain, and then made for himself in Spain a brilliant media career. When he died, tragically, at a young age of melanoma, he made the front page of so many Spanish newspapers, and he was clearly a much loved and respected person in Spain.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I was personally caught off guard by the scale of the outpouring when news filtered through that he had passed on. Across the board in Spain, right from the top, from the president or the prime minister, Pedro Sanchez, beyond football, in other sporting fields like Rafa Nadal, everybody came out to salute him. He was just a huge cultural figure over the last 30 years in the country, since he retired prematurely as a footballer from injury at around 29 or 30. He had been playing for a couple of seasons with Osasuna up in Pamplona at the time. But he carved out this niche in football, and he was... it's difficult to draw a comparison with somebody from, say, the English football world. He was far more than, say, Gary Lineker, the head face of Match of the Day. He ran a kind of football magazine program, El Dia Después, for about 14 or 15 years at the start of his media career, from around 1990 to 2004 or 2005, where he did kind of features about the fans and about the offbeat stories in football, not only about the stars and the high profile stuff. So he had a great kind of journalist's instinct for what a good story was, and he was an absolutely master communicator. He was a very warm character by nature. Anyway, people were very endeared towards him. But he obviously Spanish was his second language, and he used to joke at the start of his media career about how poor his Spanish was. When he was asked to cover the 1990 World Cup, he said at the time to the guy who commissioned him, he said, "I only have 100 words in Spanish, and 90 of those are swear words." But but he carried on, and he so people loved that kind of, as we do with foreign people who use the language as their second language. That becomes a kind of charming feature of their personality, and that was the case with Robinson, or Robin as he was known in Spain. And again, to stress how wide a kind of cultural figure he was, or how great a cultural figure he was effectively the face of Spitting Image when Spitting Image was on television in Spain, because he was the link man in the scenes as this kind of newscaster or chair of the program. So and everybody just has a story about him, particularly in Spain, and about what a wonderful character he was.
A larger than life character, full of stories, full of fun, and by all accounts, he faced his long battle with cancer. I think 2 years or possibly more. He faced it with great courage and spirit.
Absolutely, Eamon, absolutely. He came out in December 2018 to publicise the news that he had cancer, and he had it at this stage about 2 or 3 months. It was typical of his personality. He wasn't daunted by it. He was looking on the bright side. He said, every day that I'm alive, this cancer hasn't killed me. He continued working right up until the end. The last match, he used to cover El Partidazo, the big game on a Sunday night on Spanish TV. So everybody knew him from that as well.
Yes.
But the last game he covered was the famous or infamous, perhaps, Champions League game between Liverpool and Atletico Madrid at Anfield back in March. That incredible match. Yes. He covered that. He was back in Liverpool, the city which of course he loved so much. As you mentioned, he was a player with Liverpool in the mid '80s. He won a European Cup with them in '84. But he'd also been a fan of Liverpool. He had gone to Anfield as a kid in the 1960s, although he grew up in Blackpool, further north. So he was working right up until the end, and that's the way he operated.
Right. Well, it's an amazing story of an extraordinary life, a life well lived, you might say, and may he rest in peace. And thank you, Richard, for that appreciation of somebody that Irish football fans also loved, and for many of the same reasons. I think that he was taken to the hearts of Spanish people. His lust for life, and also his commitment as a footballer, which was extraordinary. Now, to move on, Richard, to the football situation and indeed the COVID-19 situation in Spain. The country has been badly afflicted and continues to be badly afflicted by this deadly virus. Nevertheless, there are attempts to get La Liga started, to finish the season, and not everyone is happy with this. Not everyone is on board. Can you tell us, first of all, I read the piece that you wrote about it, and at the heart of the people, the hearts of the people who want to restart La Liga and get it finished, money is very much an issue, is it not?
It's definitely the case. I mean, it's part of a wider debate in society in general, right across the world. This balance between safeguarding the health of the public and kickstarting the economy again. Football in Spain is more than a pastime. It's a bigger industry than per capita than it would be in other countries. It's about 1.3%. 7% of GDP here in Spain. To put that in context, agriculture is only 2.6%. So
yes.
It employs almost 200,000 people, about 184,000 according to statistics. And the players and the football clubs are at the top end of that. So they're trying to get them to go back playing. It's full steam ahead at the moment. The players have done the testing last Wednesday, 2 days ago. The results are slowly filtering back. All of the Barca squad, for example, yesterday announced that none of their players had tested positive. But the La Liga, the authorities are expecting about 30 positive cases based on the statistics that they had in Germany, which is a bit ahead. The Bundesliga.
Yes, and they're starting in Germany next week, we understand. The idea, is it that you get tested, Richard, and then go into isolation for 2 weeks?
Yeah, if you prove positive, they're going to be doing ongoing tests. The back to training protocol, as they call it here, the process is a 4-staged phase, which will last about 4 to 6 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. The tests will be carried out regularly during that period. They're hoping that there won't be many positive cases. Only one player, interestingly, refused to take that test on Wednesday. He's an interesting guy. Fali is his name. He's a player with Cadiz, who are top of the second division. They're destined to get promotion if they finish out this season. He delivered a really interesting interview on radio the other night, explaining his case. he says he's been in isolation himself for 55 days. He hasn't gone out of his apartment. He's in there with his family and his kids, and he's waived his salary until some kind of arrangement is made. His contract runs until 2024. And he says himself he could be made for life with just 1 year playing in the Premier Division. But he's stepping back. He's a test case, or he's highlighting the big kind of crisis point in this debate is that
is
these
he
footballers
refusing to be tested on principle, or like Djokovic, the tennis player? He's not against vaccinations as such. What exactly? Why is he refusing to be tested?
Yeah, it's a good point to raise. He's not advocating that the league doesn't go on and try and finish out its season. He says the league can do what it wants. He is just concerned about the personal safety of himself and his family. Yeah. He's not against testing, or that. He's saying he wants 100% guarantees until a vaccine is introduced, which seems a bit far-fetched maybe, but that's yes. the stand he's taking. He's a very measured guy. He's not hysterical. He comes across as a very engaging character, but he's just making this stand. At a wider level, clubs are very nervous, and they've come out. Eibar, for example, is one of the Premier Division clubs. They've released a statement. Now, they have gone ahead and done the testing, and they're going to go back with the protocol and go back to playing if it all comes to pass. But they raised very serious concerns that number one, why are we going back playing football when the number one criteria that public health experts across the world have been crying out about is social isolation. Football obviously is a contact sport. You can't be guaranteed your safety or from that respect. Like, for example, in Spain, one of the measures for de-escalation is that people on the metro have to wear masks. There's going to be no masks for footballers going back playing. Racing Santander, a second division club, last week raised another really valid concern that why are footballers and football clubs using all these testing equipment, getting tested so much when there's such a huge shortage of testing for the healthcare workers on the front line. There's a huge problem about the healthcare workers in Spain at the moment, about their lack of testing. The rates have jumped by about 39% in the last 2 weeks of healthcare workers contracting the virus, higher than any other country in Europe. So they're getting a hammering. They're making do still, nurses and doctors, with makeshift protective equipment because there's not enough PPE equipment going around. So this debate that's happening in football is raising all these concerns. It's also really, really interesting, the measures they're going to secure players' safety. They're talking about sanitation fortresses that the clubs have become. They're going to extraordinary lengths to protect the players with sterilisation, safety equipment, obviously the testing that we mentioned. So it's interesting how this is going to unfold.
Now, the wider problem, Richard, in Spain of the virus, I noticed this morning reading in the Financial Times comment by the Deputy Prime Minister in Spain, the leader of the Podemos party. They are socialists, I think, insurgent socialist party.
Correct. Yeah.
He said to the Financial Times that if there was not debt mutualisation across the European Union, then he believed the European Union would no longer exist. It's a very dramatic statement by someone who is in high office in Spain. Does it reflect the mood in Spain about the EU's failure, and in particular the resistance to the idea of debt mutualization by Germany and also by the Netherlands and Finland.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest game in town. That some kind of reconstruction fund is delivered, so Spain can rebuild its economy. Spain is the fourth largest economy in the EU, so it has a lot of power in that sense. Obviously, Podemos, which you flagged, they're a far left party. They've emerged over the last few years. They're in coalition with their bigger partner, the Socialist Party, forming a very fragile left-wing government at the moment. There's huge polarisation in the Spanish Parliament. On the other side of the house, you have the Conservative Party, which have often been in power over the last 35 years, Partido Popular, and their more extreme far right friends or colleagues, Vox, this party that emerged in 2014, their share of the seats jumped pretty dramatically in the last election in December.
They're far right, aren't they? Vox?
Extremely far right, yeah. They're very worrying development.
And of course, there's history in Spain, isn't there, with Franco? As indeed there is history in Italy with Mussolini, where there are also far-right parties rising now as well on the same issue. Incidentally, there are 9 countries in Europe, in fact, who called for debt mutualization, and Spain, Italy, and Ireland are among them. But that's a minority, and it looks like the mood in Europe, and I wonder about the mood in Spain, Richard. The mood in Europe really is dark in places.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way Pedro Sanchez is talking about it. There will be a recession of historic proportions when we come out, if we do come out of this coronavirus crisis. That's they're only the only way they can get out of that at the moment will be with help from the EU. So that's essential that they get that debt mutualization. There is a kind of $1 trillion fund they're talking about at the EU, but they haven't ironed out those details, whether that fund will be in the shape of loans or grants, exactly. So it remains to be seen how that'll play out.
And just in general, the mood of the people in terms of the football returning. Clearly, everyone wants to see football and other sports, but there is that issue, and Gary Neville has raised the question about English players being tested when frontline workers are not being tested, and he said it's unacceptable. And clearly, as you've just told us there are people in Spain who believe also that for any testing, frontline workers in the health service should be first in line.
Yeah, generally in the public at large, they want a return of football. They're desperate for some form of escapism. There's a divide at the same time over the priorities, but people are really keen that there is a return to normality. There's a huge push to get the economy going again, and football is a big part of that.
Yes.
So people are balancing the two ideas in their head, but there were definitely, and even when you talk to footballers in the game and people around the clubs, the majority of people do want to return to football once there are some kind of guarantees, which they have. I mean, they've extraordinary levels of safety compared to, for example, construction workers who went back to work very early, about 3 or 4 weeks ago now at this stage.
Yes.
Are at the public at large about the safety measures they have in place.
And of course, it will be behind closed doors. For the two super clubs, Barcelona, where you're based, and Real Madrid, the financial stakes, I mean, they are two of the great financial powerhouses in Europe traditionally, but they're they've fallen on hard times in relative terms, Richard. So I've seen some extraordinary stories of Barcelona, for example, who were predators, if you like, and Real Madrid. Any great player who became available, those two clubs were sure to be in the market for them. Is that going to continue, or are they going to have to work a bit harder with the players they have?
Oh, they're absolutely going to have to work harder with the players they have. They'll be using players from the youth academy. Both clubs are lucky in that they have a lot of players out on loan that they can pull back. Barcelona's most famous player out on loan would be Coutinho at Bayern Munich.
Yes.
Real Madrid have floods of really good players on loan. Akraf at Borussia Dortmund, Dani Ceballos, Martin Odegaard, who's probably been the most exciting player in La Liga this season, Norwegian player. He's up at Real Sociedad on loan for 2 years, but they can bring him back in the summer. So they're in a strong position from that sense. Like Barca, for example, have had UEFA transfer ban in the past, around 2014 or 2015. And it didn't knock anything out of them because they have such large resources. They already had a good squad in place. So, I mean, they'll be okay from that perspective. But it's really worrying for those two clubs and La Liga in general. The finances, there's a really aggressive mood to kickstart La Liga. They've cancelled football in France and in Holland, for example. But they're really desperate to get it going again and get this season finished because they stand to lose about €1 billion. If it's not, they'll already, I imagine, lose about 300 million from gate receipts. But if they don't get that television money in for concluding the season, you're looking at the guts of 700 million and from other ancillary parts of their business. So it's vital that they finish out that season. Their futures are in jeopardy. You'd have to think they're social clubs. They're owned by their members. So and we've seen clubs go out of business before and they can just reopen, changing their name or that kind of thing. But there's such a huge volume of money involved, and the Barcelona in particular, their finances are very delicate. Despite or apart from the coronavirus, they would have been facing difficulty over 100 million, and they would have had to make up in June to balance their books. So it's very, very troubling times ahead for all the big clubs in Spain.
Just a final question, Richard, about the mood in Spain in relation to the European Union, as perhaps reflected by the Deputy Prime Minister's strong words about the EU ceasing to exist, and I'm quoting him directly. How is the sentiment generally in that regard?
Yeah, what will happen is there will be scapegoats. People will be looking to find people to call to account for the collapse in the economy if it is as dramatic as being suggested. So there will be a big rise in Spanish nationalism. That's what all the signs are. You have the problem with the regions, the Basques and the Catalan separatists in the central Spanish parliament. They voted against moving to a fourth phase of the lockdown, which was increased until May 24th. So they will make hay in this kind of nightmare scenario. So that is definitely up for grabs. We obviously know how Brexit emerged over the last few years. So that kind of sentiment is definitely at play in Spain. It's a very fragile federation with the 17 regions, and now you have this big splintered parliament. Historically, you would have, or traditionally over the last 35 years, you just had the two parties, the Socialists and the Conservative Party. Now you have you've two wings trying to outflank them on the right and the left. So it's a very fragile setup.
Okay, Richard, interesting times ahead, and not in a good way. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Barcelona. That's Richard Fitzpatrick. We're very grateful to Richard.